Alrighty, this is a game in the T55A, the reward tank from the third set of personal missions. It's basically a German version of the Russian T54. This is on clip on the North Spawn. We're going to talk about a couple of different things here. Some of it is map presence, some of it is just how to be patient when you have a good position and when to recognize when you're in a good position as opposed to when you're in a poor one. And so typically from the North Spawn, especially in faster tanks, I like playing through this middle area here. I always feel like the North Spawn has an advantage to play through the center area. As long as you're not getting pushed too far by your team. And so it's always good to head up here to spot, and then again, remember, 30 to 60 seconds into the match, you want to see what your team is doing. We're sending a bunch of our mediums down towards this 2 line, which isn't necessarily bad. If they can occupy up in that F2 area, they can slow people down. Of course, this middle area is still going to be incredibly important. We want to see what their team sends out here. So they're sending a lot of their 9s up top over here, so that's something that we need to be aware of. And then again, remember, it's very easy from playing up in this position, as long as you know that their artillery does not leave the base. You can use this rock right here for cover from artillery fire, and it's very easy to just proxy spot anything in this center. So they have a lot of guys. When you look at our dispersion right now, they've got a lot of guys in this middle here. They've got a couple guys back on that line, but that's not that big of a deal. We sent our guys up through here, which isn't necessarily bad as long as they hold that donut. But they've got a number of guys here, and so we're going to need to be aware of that. And then again, especially when you have artillery on your team, see where this 5120 is at, where that T49 is at. Anybody on that side is very, very vulnerable to artillery fire. So all you really need to do is keep them lit, right? And if their artillery hasn't left their base, that means if he's anywhere from this sort of K1 area to this sort of K5 area, he can't hit you because of this rock. The only time you can actually hit this rock is if you start getting out into this sort of 6-7 line area. And then even then, it depends on the arc of the artillery. So this is a reasonably safe place, which is why I usually play here. So even though we're outnumbered here, right, it's just basically me and a couple of light tanks in this section over here. This is actually a relatively safe place to remain lit. So what I want to do is, as long as these guys in the middle are lit, that's going to give our artillery shots. So that's all that I'm really worried about. I'm not worried about counter pushing here myself because they've got a lot more guns here than me. I just want to make sure like that 5120 gets shot at. Eventually. Right, and that puts him in a bad position because he can't really shoot at me. He can't stop me from lighting him. He doesn't really get very good shots there. Fortunately, our guys on the donut are getting shot up a little bit here. Again, they still have a lot of weight here, so we have to be careful. I can't just counter push into 2 tier 9 autoloaders. And we don't have a whole lot of support here in terms of fire support, so I need to try to play this conservatively. And this is where sort of patience comes in, right? So I'm the only person really holding this area. There's a bunch of high-tier tanks here. They're not really getting good shots on me, and we can keep them lit. But we don't. At this point, there's no need for us to counter push into them per se. We're not trading very well over on this west side, but it's not something that we're in danger of losing in the immediate future. So we're not super concerned about that quite yet. Our guys are coming around the lighthouse. Again, they're going to meet a couple of tanks and resistance, but again, that's not that much of a concern. So really, the weakest point on the map for us is through this middle area. And so again, if you're that guy that's sort of spotting or holding that middle, as long as you're safe, you need to just be a little bit patient and look to make sure that you stay on your toes. So that 5120 went around over there, and so now is when we can start, you know, looking to be a little bit more aggressive in terms of either getting spots for things to get shot or actually get shots out there. This 5120 we need to keep an eye on because they've cleared out through this backside now. Although he's getting whittled down on that side as well. And we're slowly coming around this side over here. So that's something that we want to be aware of. And then all we got to do is just sort of counter push here now because they're relatively weak. And that T54 is looking for us, so we can be a little bit patient. And then, of course, you just want to make sure that you're artillery safe. One of the nice things about playing on this side of the map is that there are a lot of places where you can be artillery safe. Behind this rock, in particular, is another place where you can be artillery safe. And then now our guys are coming around. We've actually regained control of this middle area here. So despite the fact that we were literally the only tank here, we ended up winning here relatively easily, just essentially by being a mix of patient and opportunistic. And that's a lot of times what you want, how you want to play it, the attitude, the disposition that you need to have when you're sort of outnumbered or outgunned. You want to be opportunistic and take your shot, take your free damage when you can get it. Ideally not miss easy shots like that. But, and then now, right, we can play it a little bit more aggressive in terms of moving to flanking positions where you get shots on these guys. See how these guys, they don't really have a whole lot of places to run, right? So they know that our guy, that we're putting some pressure on from this side. So getting to a flanking position is always going to be to get you better shots. We have some of their guys pushing to the base, but that's not a super huge concern quite yet. It's very easy for a medium tank to spot in there. And so we know that they have 2 to 3 tanks over running through this side, so that's something we'll keep an eye on. And we'll just do a little quick loop here to see if we can find anything. And so you always want to try to take down the biggest gun possible, so that would be, in this case, the T30. We have a little bit of a hull down here. And so we don't know where the T71 is. Presumably he looped back. Okay, he's apparently behind us. And again, remember the T71 is going to be okay at shooting at our sides, but he's not going to really be able to damage us very efficiently through our frontal armor. And I want to get a shot on this T30. I didn't realize that he could have damaged us through there because it didn't look like we were far enough down, but that's okay. So the T71 went down, the T30 is dead. The T29 did not get on the cap, right? We have a couple of guys headed towards their cap, and it's sort of overwatched by a 4503. So I know that I have time to go back and deal with this 4503. And this goes to something that we talk about a bit in the stream. It's understand what is the greatest threat to your tank. And in this particular case, the 4503 isn't really the greatest threat to our tank, right? But so we're sitting here and we're shooting at the 4503, right? But we know that the T71 is down here. So at some point he's going to either come around over on this side, or he's going to come around on this side, or he's going to get on the cap, right? But nobody's on the cap. So as long as nobody's on the cap, then I have to understand that the amount of time that I have to shoot this 4503 is basically the amount of time it takes for this T71 to reload and get back up behind me, because I don't want to allow him to shoot into my rear, right? And so that means that I'm probably not going to have time to kill this 4503 because he's going to take about 3 shots to kill this guy. And so you have to be opportunistic, take your damage, And then you gotta turn around and deal with the guy that's going to be coming up behind you in some way, right? And again, this is the idea of this is that, so I could have sat here and probably got another shot on the 4503, right? But it's not like the 4503 is any threat to push over behind me. He can't get over here fast enough, and I need to turn around because I'm going to need to deal with with any tanks that potentially come up behind me. And then now I can turn back around and deal with the 4503. And the T-29 might be coming up as well. We don't know exactly where he's at. The 4503 can technically pen me frontally, so I need to be a little bit careful. And then that's pretty much it. And so a lot of the game was spent being patient, right? A lot of the early game was spent being patient. A lot of the mid game was spent being opportunistic. And then it was, in the late game, it was just, okay, identify the matchups, identify the threats, and sort of take them out sequentially. And so, again, coming up into this area here in the early game was fine because it allowed us to basically keep a lot of their high tiers lit, right? And so their high tiers were locked in that middle for probably a little bit too long, right? Where they weren't really able to deal damage efficiently. We didn't really trade that well on the west, but eventually our guys got around on the east, right? And part of the reason why you don't want to allow them to control this middle is because once they, we had a bunch of tanks on the west, a bunch of tanks on the east, but once they control the middle, then they can start getting flanking fire onto either side. And so you still want to be able to control that middle, along with the fact that just the north spawn gets some terrain advantages on this particular map. And then, again, remember you need to just sort of bide your time if you're that weak link. If you think that they're going to push you or if you're not in a good position, then you should run away, right? And don't let them basically just come in on you. But again, if they're not really threatening to push you or damage you, and you're in a good position, be patient in that position. If you're in a bad position, right, relocate. If you're in a good position, you can slow play it a little bit depending on what the rest of your team is doing. Right? If the rest of your team is failing miserably or camping, then you're going to probably have to do something someplace else. You'll relocate and try to find some other weakness. But in this particular case, we were doing okay on the west and we were winning on the east. And so it was there's not a whole lot of pressure on us to make something out of nothing in the middle there when we don't have to. And then once those guys broke through on the east, then it was time to be opportunistic. Then it wasn't time to sit back and be conservative. Then it was time to relocate, to get shots on these guys over here, to take advantage of the fact that your guys were pushing in to get flanking fire. And then at the end, again, it's just a matter of identifying your threats and then just eliminating the most important threats first. All right. So if you look at stats, again, so we ended up doing a lot of damage, but most of that was not early damage. We did get some spotting damage, or a little bit early, or we had an opportunity to spot the enemy team early. We didn't really get that much spotting damage from it because our team wasn't really in a position to do a lot of damage there. But in this particular case, I don't think that that's necessarily bad. Ideally, you want to get as much early damage as you possibly can. But again, if you're the guy on the weak side and you're holding the weak side efficiently, then, I mean, that's pretty much the best you can do in that type of situation. And then, again, though, there's always going to be a time in the game where you have to become more active, where you have to relocate. You just need to be able to pick and choose that, ideally. So the shooting wasn't that bad. The tank essentially has the same gun as the T54, so it's a gun that I'm familiar with and a gun that I like. We ended up not really bouncing a whole lot of shots, just pretty much from the T71. You don't really bounce a whole lot. The turret is okay, but again, it's a matter of identifying the threats and just taking them out as soon as you can. So anyways, I hope that was helpful for, in a sense, slow playing when you are at a disadvantage. General, and adjusting to the sort of threats, or keeping in mind the sort of threats that you might be up against. So thanks for watching.